Welcome, Stuart Balcombe, to Video Mojo. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
I think that we have really just in a couple conversations established a kind of affinity for content marketing and conversational marketing and the need for quality in that kind of marketing. So, why don't we start right there? So I made up this title, How Not to Let Automation Suck the Soul Out of Your Content Marketing. Speak to that, because I know at Procket you have a real commitment to quality, and that's part of what attracted me to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that is core, not just to sort of, as you mentioned, what we're doing at Procket and how we approach things at Procket, but also sort of content marketing today, and sort of the expectations for content marketing, and so really the quality and sort of the bar for content marketing that actually gets the results that you want it to get. People today, have almost limitless choice for who they can buy from, which products they can buy, and your content really is an opportunity to differentiate your expertise from just more content, right? Like, it's relatively easy today. There's a million tools that I'm sure we'll get into that help you automate, as you mentioned, just creating content. But the question really isn't, can we create content? It's, can we create content that actually resonates with our audience, that actually moves the ball, moves the conversation forward, and gets us closer to having, ultimately a one-to-one relationship with our customers because they've purchased our product.
Yeah, it's the bottom line. And at the end of the day, I think people want to play the long game. And you can put that in contrast to, I know other services that are talking about content marketing machines, and it becomes about the quantity of generating more stuff to fill the channel. So you don't believe in that approach, is that correct?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I do think that quantity matters to a certain extent. I think that, there are an increasing number of channels, there are an increasing number of places that your customers or your potential customers hang out, and being able to reach your customers where they are means that you need to create more content than just the original piece which lives on your website, because let's be honest, people are not hanging out on your website day in, day out. That is not the place that they go for news. That is not the place that they go to be entertained. They're on Twitter, they're on LinkedIn, they're on Instagram. Wherever they are, there's lots of channels. There are many places where your audience hangs out, and being able to meet them where they are is certainly core to what we believe and what we help folks do. But more importantly than just content and volume of content for the sake of filling the content calendar, right? I'm sure that this will resonate with content marketers, that they are sort of burned out and tired and feel like they're on this sort of never-ending hamster wheel of content creation for the sake of filling a content calendar. More important than that is making sure that the origin of the content, the original content, actually goes deep into the expertise, the thing that you are uniquely qualified to talk about. And from there, you can expand to all these channels. You can reach people with that content in different ways, but it has to start from a place of quality, a place of expertise, and sort of a place of differentiation, ultimately, which it's really hard to get to if your approach is, let's just create lots of content. So to sort of sum that up and sort of bring it full circle, our belief is that content marketers should spend more time, and people who want to create content in general should spend more time creating better, deeper, original content, and then find ways to repackage that and distribute it across the channels, rather than creating lots of sort of individual net new pieces that are sort of more surface level and don't go as deep, but there's lots of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I've been using the phrase that conversations are king. And I know that another angle, and I believe one of your co-founders is involved with conversational marketing.
Yeah.
And so, as you said, it all starts with a meaningful conversation, which I think is also awesome, because you get to, when you're doing a podcast, as I'm doing here in this exploration of video marketing in particular, I get to develop my voice. I get to try things. I get to see, who do I resonate with? I chose you specifically to have a conversation with because you get it with regard to quality. So that having been said, why don't you talk a little bit about what Procket does in order to deliver a quantity of content based on conversations, I presume, but then to make sure down the line that you're delivering the pieces that are needed by these hungry social media channels, but with the quality in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a great point there that ultimately everything does start with a conversation, right? So really where we focus and where the sort of the input to Procket comes from is from an existing recording, an existing podcast, an existing webinar, an existing, fireside chat, whatever it might be. And the reason for doing that is that it's a conversation between experts, right, talking about things that they know about, but it's firsthand, right? Like it's really easy for things to get diluted when you have somebody who is not the expert, who's doing the research, doing the original, or producing the original piece of content. You end up with sort of playing telephone on what this thing actually means, right? So that's really the first sort of the reason that we start there is to have that sort of the source content being really high quality and sort of deep in expertise. A big piece of creating content that stands out is, having a unique voice, having a unique perspective. And what we're really doing is we're not coming up with that unique voice, right? We're just taking what we hear in the original interview and just applying it to whatever sort of content format we're ultimately going to create. But in terms of sort of how we extract the good bits, the best bits that we want to be sharing, right, across these channels, and I think that, a core belief of ours is that we're not just copy pasting what was said in the interview into Twitter or into LinkedIn, right? Like we're actually creating new value or a new way to access the value from that conversation in the particular channel. But really the first thing that we're doing, it's almost a research task. And sort of one of the driving factors behind starting Procket was running a customer research business where essentially we were doing this for clients with a very different end result or a very different end deliverable. But the methodology, the idea that we're looking for sort of atomic insight within a conversation, identifying the sort of specific, the moments where people are, they're connecting sort of the emotional component with the sort of more functional or sort of tactical nugget that they might be sharing, really sort of extracting those insights at the atomic level and then sort of building them back up into themes, into, hooks for content, into, larger pieces of content, whether it's, an individual post on social, whether it's a thread of related content on social, whether it's a more narrative blog post, which is turning, sort of multiple key insights from a conversation into something else. It really starts there with that sort of, it's a mix of sort of research practice and almost sort of a journalism type bent to the work. The goal is like, what are the individual pieces that people want to hear about? If that's all we can share, what do we share, right? And because ultimately, if you don't start there, and this is sort of to your point about automation and how to not create soulless content, if you don't start with the things that are actually worth sharing, then what are you sharing, right? Like what's the point in just sharing? Nobody needs yet another social post, right? Or yet another blog post. They need the thing that is novel, that resonates with them, and that is actually relevant to them. And I think that that's the hard thing, especially when we work with a lot of sort of B2B companies who you're selling to people who really like are domain experts themselves, right? Or know about the subject matter that you're talking about. So just pulling sort of high level waffle, it's just noise, right? And that's really where we focus, is making sure that it's not just insights from the conversation, it's the right insights.
Right, and that's where the automation and people's desire to let AI make the decisions doesn't work. It does suck the soul out of the content, because you do need that journalistic, as you mentioned, or I would say an editorial human being who's making very subjective decisions about where the true value is in this conversation and what is actually worth sharing. So you unlike people that are trying to automate the process, you really have human beings performing that function. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that really is the core function at Procket, is extracting those insights. As you mentioned, there's lots of AI tools out there that will either claim to or try to do the same work, right? To summarize and to extract, bullet points from longer text, or provide you with sort of a starting point. And those tools certainly have value, and there is a place for being able to automate parts of the process. But I don't believe today, and this may change, right? But I don't believe today that AI does the thing that AI really doesn't do a good job of is combining context with a specific insight, right? Like, why is this particular piece of content valuable in the context of the overall story that we're trying to tell? Or why is this particular piece of content relevant to the particular audience that we're trying to serve? Because typically those tools don't have enough input to be able to do that with any kind of accuracy, which ultimately shows itself in the end result.
Yeah, and you're right. There are definitely tools that can help. I'm going to be doing more about the Descript video editing platform, which also, of course, does audio, and they automate the transcript process. That's one of the things that is not an extra step. I love Otter, and I still have an Otter subscription, but the fact that Descript does the transcription right inside, and it's a breakthrough in video editing, but still, it's the human editorial and a human understanding. Like you said, context, I think, is a good word. I've been a big fan of the phrase marketing that matters. Right. It's just not a matter of more stuff, like you said, and we don't want more noise. We actually want to understand our story, whatever it is that you're sharing, that you're passionate about, that you think is of service to the world. And then how does that conversation reflect it in a way that people can understand the value you're trying to bring to the party?
Yeah. And I think that this is an area where repackaging of content is really valuable, right? Like, as a brand, or even as an individual, there are a limited number of things that you're probably truly going to be an expert on, right? And that you're really going to be able to go deep and have unique insight and a unique perspective on, because ultimately your perspective and your expertise comes from your experience, right? And there's sort of limited hours in the day, there's limited places that you can apply yourself, but it allows you to talk about that original asset which works, right? And is good, and you've gone deep on. It allows you to talk about that in lots of different ways, and lots of different places, and reach lots of different people, right? Which is the idea behind, when should you expand from one channel to another? Well, at some point, and this doesn't happen very early, like it takes a long time to get there in most channels, right? But you can reach a different audience than you're currently reaching on, say, Twitter, by repackaging the exact same original content to LinkedIn, right? Like, there's different people who are active on one platform versus another. There are different people who will engage with your message in different ways, right? Like, it's the same thing as the difference between the people who listen to a podcast versus the people who watch YouTube, right? If you're starting from the same original content that is good and that works, right? Like, I just tweeted this this weekend, but like, if you have the fastest way to create new content that should perform, right, or at least has a high likelihood of performing, is go to your analytics tools, find your top performing blog post, and turn it into a thread, turn it into a LinkedIn story, turn it into a LinkedIn slideshow, turn it into an Instagram carousel.
Turn it into a TikTok video.
Yeah, exactly. There are countless ways that you can repackage the same piece of content, and especially if you know that the original content works, you sort of have a cheat code for creating more content that works, right? Because, I mean, we just talked to somebody who, they came to us at Procket and said, hey, we have a ton of webinars. Webinars are our top performing marketing sort of asset. They're the thing that is the most enabling to sales. They're the closest thing to revenue. How do we get them everywhere, right? Like, people are coming on and we have great guests. We have great partners with our webinars, but it's an hour of content. There's great nuggets in there, but not everybody has an hour to listen and watch a webinar, right? How do you make that same content accessible? And I think that this is a new thing that we're going to see more and more of, is not just, how do you distribute content, but this idea of making content accessible and consumable in a way that actually matches how your audience wants to engage and wants to consume it.
Yeah, it's one of the fascinating things about this conversation to me, and I love that you bring webinars into it, because I've heard it almost always talked about from the point of view of podcasts, that podcasts are conversations, and then we're remarketing those, repackaging those, spitting them out as different forms of content. But it's a job. I mean, you've created a company because it's a job. Obviously, bigger companies have entire content marketing teams that are doing this. But amongst smaller businesses, startups, entrepreneurs, and so forth, webinars are a great place to find these kinds of nuggets. But then, you know, what I'm learning, and when I'm working my own content as well as working for clients, I notice that what really works is to repackage in a way that is consistent with the context or the culture, you could say, of each different social network. Right? I've been plugging TikTok because I think that there's a great opportunity for exposure there. And in full transparency, I'm still working on the language of video in TikTok.
Right.
Right. My background is video, and I'm a big advocate of doing things in the various video platforms. But clearly, doing something for YouTube, doing something for video with video on LinkedIn, let alone making a TikTok or an Instagram reel, each one has nuances and qualities that are different. Do you see that as a core part of what you all do in the clients that you serve?
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely true. And like you say, it goes beyond. I mean, I mentioned earlier about sort of not just copy pasting the same content, right? Like that's sort of one level. But then you have, you know, what are the actual content restrictions of each platform, right? Like what is the character count on LinkedIn versus Twitter? What is the, you know, the video length which you can use on Instagram versus on YouTube or in other places? But the layer deeper than that, and I think you're going a layer deeper still, there's another layer beyond that, which is what are sort of the format constraints, right? Like how do you think about, like, where is content going to get cut off on LinkedIn, right? If you haven't finished your hook, or if you haven't hooked the reader before the content gets cut off, well, you missed them, right? The same thing with how people are consuming video on specific channels, right? Like if you haven't hooked them in the first couple of seconds, you've lost them, versus on other channels there may be, you know, more of an opportunity to develop a narrative and have sort of a different conversation with the consumer. But then to your point, a level deeper still is what is the culture on that channel, right? How do people, like, what are the things that people are sharing? What are the things that people are engaging with that is different between, you know, one channel and another? And I think that's what makes repackaging both exciting and also challenging, right? Like we've talked to folks who, you know, before switching to Procket, or even, you know, just in sort of casual conversations, are using 3, 4, 5 different people to create content for each of these channels, because it's significant work for one person, right? Like and beyond just the time it takes, it's sort of expertise in all the different channels, which is required to truly be native to each place that you're distributing your content.
Yeah, so let's come back to the human element, because I think that is the answer. Big spoiler alert, not, that the answer to how not to have automation suck the soul out of your content marketing is to have really high quality people who can make intelligent editorial decisions, so that the nuggets, the pieces of content that you're pulling out of longer form to put in various shorter form social media contexts really are done well and make a difference and aren't just more noise. So how does it work on your side, having built a team and having the commitment to quality that I understand you have? Yeah,
and that's a great point. I think that one of the big learnings for us has been, you know, how to structure a team around this content, around the different types of content that we're creating. And I mentioned sort of the multiple roles that, you know, might already be hired, or you may already be thinking about hiring if you're to do this in-house. That's essentially the same way that our team is structured. We have, you know, folks who are really good at pulling insight, folks who are really good at writing longer form content, folks who, you know, have a preference for writing in a sort of focus on writing shorter form content, for creating video, and really, one thing that we've been finding is that the people who are the best fit for this type, at least again, this may not apply to everyone, but at least from our experience, the people who are the best fit, the people who are more sort of creators rather than, I've gone really deep on writing, for example, right? That they are creators who are seeing what's happening in the world, who are seeing, the sort of evolution of these different channels. Our goal is really just to create an environment where they have time to create in the way that they might, for themselves or for their own channels, and then translate that expertise to working on sort of individual clients' content. Because I think that the interesting thing here is that we're talking about content where the goal is distribution, right? The goal is consumption, because the original piece of content, the original source material has already been created, right? Like, yes, we're creating a new sort of remix of that content, but we're not going away and doing original research and sort of we're not going 0 to 1. We're really helping folks go from 1 to 10, which is, how do you translate that expertise? How do you translate that conversation into something which is consumable everywhere? Which I think it's a different skill set than, okay, we have this idea for a piece of content, let's create the first version of it. Both very valuable, but I think it's different. And I think that's the thing that can be hard for a team which is sort of in this model, on this sort of hamster wheel that I mentioned earlier, of creating net new content from scratch all the time. I think it's just sort of a mindset shift to think about how do you take something that already exists and really take it that extra mile. Awesome.
Is there anything else that you think I should have asked you about this process, or anything that you're particularly passionate about in the moment in terms of, what's working in the marketplace and things that are overlooked or not often enough talked about?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that I've been learning, and the biggest thing that I think, if you're looking to repackage content, really be conscious of the difference between, and maybe I need a better word for this, but the difference between truly repackaging content and promoting content. And I think that the big distinction there, which sort of makes it very easy to see which type of content you're looking at, is how early in the piece of content is the link. I think that the one thing that we are certainly conscious of is that, if people are on a social channel, they're doing another task other than trying to consume your original content, right? They're scrolling through their feed, they're trying to learn, they're looking for entertainment. Their goal is probably not go listen to 40 minutes of podcast, right? Or go read even a blog post, like 13, 15-minute blog post. How can we make sure that we're delivering value which can be consumed sort of in line or in the flow of what I'm already doing? So I think that that's the biggest thing, is that when you're looking to repackage content, how can you, sure, link to your content at the end, but how can you move that sort of further down so that it really becomes if you want to learn more, let's go see this, but you can consume and get value from the content without having to leave the channel that you're in.
Yeah, good point. Each piece of content should stand alone. Is that a good kind of summary of what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and the other piece, tell me if you want to discuss this further, but the other thing that when you were talking earlier about the hook and maybe having a longer form context where the hook may not be as immediate as, for example, in TikTok, if you don't nail the hook in the first 2 seconds, forget about it. I think that in a lot of cases, having a good title and thumbnail on YouTube, it's non-negotiable. And I, same thing for an email marketing piece. If you don't have a good subject line, it doesn't get opened as much. And so I think that attention grabbing hook that needs to happen in the first 5 seconds or the first contact that anybody is going to have with that piece of content, I think it's a requirement for every piece of content that hook is there in the title and in the first 5 seconds. Did you think it's other than that?
No, I certainly agree with that. I think that the hook is something that we certainly spend a lot of time, thinking about and making sure that is sort of central to the content that we're presenting. I think some channels give you longer to develop a narrative. You still have to get people into the story, right? The goal of the first line is read the next line, right? The goal of the next line is read the line after that. Being aware of, if you're writing a narrative blog post, you do have some more time to develop a deeper story rather than on, let's say, Twitter. You have to get, people want the actionable thing right away, right? So you maybe go hook actionable thing, whereas in a blog post you can hook, develop a little bit of a story, then get to the actionable tactic. So I think that you certainly have to get people in and engaged to keep going, right? That's it. I definitely agree that that's a non-negotiable, because otherwise you're in that sea of content rather than standing out.
Cool. And I love sharing resources. I'll throw a resource in here, which is I've been really enjoying the CoSchedule Headline Studio. And as always, we'll put links to the resources that we mentioned in the show notes or the content wherever this appears. They've gamified it, and you get a rating of 1 to 100 on your draft headlines, and then you can tweak it and hit reanalyze again, and it makes suggestions. And my headline that I came up with for this episode got an 87, which was one of the highest scores ever. But anyway, it's a fun resource that I think helps with the titling and creating that kind of hook. Are there other resources that you're a fan of these days that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think that the one, and he certainly has a lot of good, a lot of great resources, but Julian Shapiro has a really great guide on writing well, particularly focused around writing for the internet, right, and writing for channels which are busy and have a lot going on. And he also runs, there's a Twitter account, Growth Tactics, connected to the agency Demand Curve. So that's certainly one that I always recommend. I think for Twitter specifically, I know Blake Emal, the CMO at, I know it's an AI tool, but Copy AI, is the company that he works for. But I think he does a really great job on Twitter of sharing resources. And the other one that I really look to, or the other person that I really look to as sort of really putting good content first and good copywriting first is Dave Gerhardt, of a CMO at Privy now. He runs DGMG and has a podcast as well, sort of connected to that. There's tons of good resources, tons of, if you're looking to sort of get active on LinkedIn and sort of make more of your content on LinkedIn, his personal account is a good swipe file for sort of how to write well for a specific channel. And I think that sort of as a higher level takeaway, if you're looking to develop your presence, if you're looking to repackage your content, typically the people who are earlier and sort of up and coming are actually better to look at than the people who already have a ton of followers, because the bar for that content is higher. But sort of pick through their content, pull examples out, and then essentially use that content as a template for the types of sort of formats that work and formats that fit the channel, and apply that to your own content and the own sort of insights that you're pulling from your original content.
That's great. Thank you so much for those resources. It makes me want to throw in one more about online writing. I recently did the Ship 30 for 30 challenge, and Nicholas Cole is one of the co-founders of that and leaders. And I was surprised and really wasn't expecting as much online teaching about writing in particular, which Nicholas Cole did. He has a book called The Art and Business of Online Writing. He was great and really valuable content, and I got a lot of value out of listening to what he had to say. So your website is Use Procket, and I know you're on Twitter. Do you want to offer any other coordinates or places where they can find out more about you and what you do? Yeah,
I'm at Stuart Balcombe on Twitter. That's really the best place to reach me on social. I'm certainly much more active there than anywhere else. Or if you want to chat, one-to-one, also feel free to email me, Stuart at useprocket.com. But yeah, those are really the best places, the website, Twitter, and email. Always happy to chat. I mean, I think that this is one of the big attractions to me of podcasting and of being active in sort of the marketing community is really the one-to-one relationships that you're able to build. Like I've found that I think generally everybody is really helpful and really open to learning. So yeah, if you're listening to this and have questions, then feel free to reach out.
Probably people can tell from watching or listening to this conversation that you are enthusiastic about sharing information, and I've really enjoyed our conversations and value the way that you are open and love to share and love to continue learning, as I think we're all continuously learning as this whole world of social media, et cetera, continues to evolve and change right before our eyes. So thanks again, Stuart. I appreciate you taking the time, and great to talk to you as always.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me.